and I'd try like 20 minutes of new jokes, and they all work. Just applause for every joke. I'm like, I'm the king, I'm the best.
A lot of people talk about stand-up comedy nowadays. Even though it's a comedian's job to make people laugh, a lot of comedians find themselves embroiled deep in controversy. This brings us to
Louis C.K.
Louis C.K.
Louis C.K.
Louis C.K.
Who is Louis C.K.? He has certainly had one of the most interesting career arcs out of any celebrity on the planet. Some people call him the greatest stand-up comedian of all time, while some people call him a reprehensible monster who should be locked up forever. Who's right? Why is Louis C.K. such a polarizing figure in show business? At one point in time, Louis C.K. was described as the industry darling who could do no wrong. How did he go from being such a beloved figure to being such a hated figure, seemingly overnight? Aside from the controversy, what makes Louis C.K. such an incredible comedian? Because say what you want about the man, but what you can't say is that his success as an artist didn't come without good reason. By the end of this video, you will know exactly who Louis C.K. is, where he came from, some of the amazing work he's done, his fall from grace and how he moved past it, and what makes his style of comedy so spectacular and unforgettable. This is Louis C.K., the most controversial comedian ever. On September 12, 1967, Louis Alfred Sikely was born in Washington, D.C. His mother was a software engineer named Mary Louise, and his father was an economist named Louis Sikely. His father, Louis, is of Mexican and Hungarian Jewish descent. Louis' paternal grandfather's name was Jesus Sikely Schweiger, and he was originally from Hungary, but had immigrated to Mexico in the 1920s, which is where the name Sikely comes from. His mother, Mary, was a Catholic American who came from Irish descent. Louis also has 3 sisters. His parents met while they were both attending Harvard University located within Boston, Massachusetts. Despite being born in Washington, D.C., when Louis was just a baby, his family decided to move back to Mexico, where his father had earned a degree from the National Autonomous University of Mexico after graduating from Harvard. In the meantime, Louis lived in Mexico until he was 7 years old, until his family moved back to the States to reside in the Boston area, specifically in Framingham, Massachusetts, for about a year. His first language was Spanish, and he did not learn English until moving back to the States initially. Then when Louis was just 10 years old, his parents decided to get a divorce. His mother was overwhelmingly present in his young life after the divorce. Louis states that his father was around, but that he did not see him a lot after the separation. Eventually, his father would remarry a woman who was an Orthodox Jew, and this would lead to his father converting to Orthodox Judaism. With his father out of the picture, Louis was primarily raised by a single mom and influenced by his 3 sisters. His mother would work long hours to provide for Louis and his sisters, and when she would come home, she would often watch TV shows that were highly inappropriate for children, and this would inspire Louis to work on television when he was older. When Louis reached 15 years old, he attended Newton North High School in Boston, where he would go on to graduate in 1985. One of his peers when he graduated was none other than Matt LeBlanc from the famous TV show Friends. After graduating from high school, Louis C.K. got a job working as an auto mechanic to pay the bills, and while he did that, he also worked part-time at a public access TV cable station in Boston. According to Louis, working in public access TV part-time provided him with the tools and technical knowledge that he needed to make TV shows and short films later on in his career. To this day, one of Louis' favorite things to do is to learn. In his time working, he held a few other jobs, such as a cook at a local Boston restaurant and as an attendant at a video store. In 1984, Louis C.K. started his journey as an artist when he directed his first short film titled Trash Day. The film caught some notable people's attention because after the release, the New York University Tisch School of Arts showed interest in him as a filmmaker. However, Louis decided he wanted to pursue a career in stand-up comedy. Ever since Louis was very young, he always wanted to become a stand-up comedian and a writer, and he held on to that dream until he was old enough to get into comedy nightclubs. So in 1985, Louis C.K. decided to try stand-up comedy for the very first time at Stitch's Comedy Club in Boston, during an open mic night. At the time, Louis was only 17 years old, so the club didn't even want to let him in initially. Eventually, after telling them he just wanted to try stand-up comedy and that he wasn't going to drink, they decided to let him in to do it. Given the complexity of his last name being Sikely and spelled strangely, he decided to just write down Louis C.K. so the host had an easier time reading his name. He had been given 5 minutes of stage time, but he realized very quickly that he only had about 2 minutes of material. Louis actually tells the story of his first time performing on stage in an interview on the Fresh Air podcast with Terry Gross. Check it out.
Do you remember your first open mic night?
Oh, yeah, I'll never forget that.
Can you tell us about it?
Well, I found out that you could do there was an open mic night at a club in Boston where I started called Stitches. And I was actually like 17, almost 18 years old. And I thought, geez, you can go on stage. They said you do 5 minutes. You just put your name in a hat and you get on stage. You can be anybody. That was so exciting to me. So I went to this club, Stitches, which is very grown up. They didn't even want to let me in because I was underage. And they have a drinking, a liquor license. And then I went on stage and I did about 2 minutes because I didn't have enough material. Like I sputtered, my whole throat constricted, and I heard this roaring in my ears. My eyes were watering. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't control myself. I couldn't think straight, and all these adults, like drinking adults, were looking at me like I'm an idiot. And I just walked off stage to kind of confused, like, little applause. And I just felt like a pile of garbage.
As most comedians do, Louis struggled his first time on stage, and it was very traumatizing for him. Most comedians are not on top of the world when they first start out. Unfortunately for Louis, his first experience scared him away from performing comedy for quite a while. Apparently, he was so discouraged, he didn't perform again until 2 years later. One day when Louis was working at the video store, in comes comedian Kevin Meaney, who was shopping at the video store, and Louis recognized him immediately. According to him, at the time, Kevin Meaney was all over the radio, and apparently he was a huge celebrity in the local Boston comedy scene. Louis proceeded to tell him that he had done an open mic night at Stitches Comedy Club, and so Kevin told him he wanted him to perform on his show at Stitches, because Kevin Meaney and Steve Sweeney ran a local show where they would bring on all the best comedians in Boston. Louis didn't want to do the show, but Kevin persisted in him doing it anyway because he said it would be interesting to have a comedian on the show who had no idea what he was doing. I'll let Louis tell the rest of the story.
Well, I didn't do it for a little while, and then at the time I was working at a video rental store in Newton, Massachusetts, where I grew up. And Kevin Meaney, who was a very big star in the Boston comedy scene back then, Boston had a very strong local scene. And I knew who Kevin was. I heard him on the radio and stuff. And Kevin was a customer at the store I went to, that I worked at. And I told him that I had done an open mic. And he said, oh, well, you got to come on my show. He had a show that was a huge, him and Steve Sweeney, these two great comics. They had this show where they would, they'd pack the room and put on all the best comics in Boston. And he said, come be on my show. And I said, well, no, I'd need to practice, do more shows to get good enough. And he said, no, I won't let you go on my show unless you go on now. He said, it's interesting because you don't know what you're, like, it's comedy tragedy. He kind of wanted me to go on and bomb. And so I went again into Stitches, and it was a Wednesday night. It was Sweeney Meaney night. It was jam-packed. And I went on, and I think the audience, people's mouths were open. They were shocked at how bad I was. Just shocked. And I got off stage, and Kevin wouldn't look me in the eye, and nobody would. And it was just the most pulverizing humiliation. It was much worse than the first time, because it was a really, the first time was an open mic night. The premise of the show is that most of us don't know what we're doing. But this was a professional comedy show.
Norm Macdonald would think what Kevin did was hilarious, but I can't help but feel bad for young Louis. However, as all great comedians do, Louis just kept on trying and working hard to improve at comedy for the next few years, and he started to achieve some success early on. Even just his third time on stage went a lot better than the first two sets he did, according to him. Here's a story Louis tells about some of his early progression as a comedian.
The first time I went on stage, I did kind of offbeat and weird jokes, just because I thought, you might as well try being more like what makes you laugh. I did really well. My third time on stage, I had really big laughs. And other comedians came up to me and said, hey, you're funny, you got something. And I was so excited that I had a little foot in the door, that this is something I could maybe do. And I thought, it's me being kind of weird the way I am in real life. I like to say things that don't make a whole lot of sense or surprise people a little bit. But then I got seduced by getting big laughs, and then I just started doing. Once you get laughs, you're like, oh, I'll do anything for that feeling. That feels really good. So then you start thinking it's just jokes.
So the first time you were on stage and started doing jokes where the comics were coming up to you and saying that was good, you've got something. What were you doing? What is it that you were doing on stage that they had a positive reaction to you?
I was doing more kind of contemplative, weird jokes. I don't think I did things that were self-reflective. I did things that were just like, well, one of the bits was about street signs, that I thought they should be punctuated, because I got confused by them. Like signs like "No, you turn," drive slow, children, that kind of thing. It was just taking these street signs and reimagining them. And that was an offbeat, funny, silly bit. And it made people laugh. And that's the only one I remember from then now.
Even in his early days as a young comedian, Louis was being observational and using that as his main fuel for his comedy act. Some of Louis C.K.'s comedic influences include George Carlin, Robin Williams, Richard Pryor, Steve Martin, and the famous hypocrite Bill Cosby. As the Boston comedy scene grew, and Louis himself continued to evolve as a stand-up comedian, he gradually obtained more and more opportunities. He built an incredible resume in his early 20s, sharing the stage with comedians like Lenny Clark, Dennis Leary, and he eventually moved up to regular paid gigs hosting at comedy clubs, and this led to Louis receiving the opportunity to open for Jerry Seinfeld very early on in his career. Then in 1989, Louis decided to move to Manhattan to grow more as a comedian and find greater opportunity. This led to him making his television debut at 24 years old on the shows Evening at the Improv and Star Search. Additionally, Louis shot a short film called Ice Cream, which would then be submitted to the Aspen Short Fest later in 1994. Louis C.K. would then audition for Saturday Night Live in 1993, but he would unfortunately be declined the position as a cast member. Although he was denied, he would eventually work with Robert Smigel as a writer for the TV Funhouse Shorts, which was a segment on Saturday Night Live that showed a cartoon show. This would not be the only writing job Louis would receive, because he would go on to work as a writer on the Conan O'Brien Show from 1993 to 1994. Then, the next year, he would serve a short tenure writing for The Late Show with David Letterman in 1995. Apparently, this was a rough period for Louis, because he stated that if he did not receive the job to write for Conan O'Brien, then he would have quit comedy altogether. Thankfully, Conan hired Louis to write for the show, subsequently keeping Louis C.K.'s comedy career alive. Speaking of rough periods, Louis would also get married in 1995 to Alex Bailey. Then a year later, in the spring of 1996, Louis C.K. would serve as the head writer for The Dana Carvey Show. The full writing team besides Louis consisted of Steve Carell, Stephen Colbert, Robert Smigel, and Charlie Kaufman. Unfortunately, the show was canceled after only airing 7 episodes. Then in 1996, Louis received the opportunity to record a half-hour HBO special, and it was very well received. After this special, Louis proceeded to get more writing work because from 1997 to 1999, he would go on to write for Chris Rock on The Chris Rock Show. Louis really exceeded as a writer for the show, so much so that he would be nominated 3 times for a Primetime Emmy Award for each year he worked on the show, and he would go on to win the award in 1999. This would not be the first time Louis had been nominated either for his writing, because one year while he was working on the Conan O'Brien Show, he was also nominated for an Emmy. The reason he was nominated is because, according to his peers, Louis would write comedy in a very surgical and meticulous manner. He's been quoted as saying that his approach to writing is a deconstruction that it is both painful and frightening. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Louis took a few years to focus on filmmaking. This isn't to say that Louis stopped doing stand-up comedy altogether, just that he was equally passionate about filmmaking and had some projects in mind that he wanted to get to work on. For example, in 1998, Louis wrote and directed an independent black and white film titled Tomorrow Night, which premiered at the Sundance, which marked his feature film directional debut after making several shorter films, which included 6 short films for the sketch show Howie Mandel's Sunny Skies on the Showtime cable network in 1995. Louis would then go on to self-release Tomorrow Night much later on in the year 2014, but in 1999, Louis would also host a PBS show called Shortcuts, which was a show that featured a lot of independently released short films, and some of the films featured were films Louis directed himself. Later that year, he would also host the Filthy Student Talent Show, which is a mock talent show TV special. Then in 2000, Louis was given an acting role in an independent comedy film titled Tuna, with actor and comedian Nick Offerman. The following year, Louis would perform on a stand-up comedy showcase known as Comedy Central Presents. Then in the year 2001, Louis would write and direct the movie Pootie Tang, which was based off a sketch that was featured on The Chris Rock Show, featuring Chris Rock as a supporting role in the movie. The critics absolutely hated Pootie Tang, and it was even rated at half a star. Movie critic Roger Ebert actually called it a literal train wreck. However, the film, despite its negative reviews, was still a cult classic among fans. Louis was actually fired at the end of the filming for the movie, and the movie was completely re-edited by the studio itself. Despite Pootie Tang being a blemish on Louis' resume, because of the grueling ratings it received, he would go on to co-write screenplays for Rock, Down to Earth, which was released in 2001, and I Think I Love My Wife, which was released in 2007. Then in 2001, Louis would proceed to record his first comedy album, which was titled Live in Houston. Then in 2002, he voiced Brendan Small's estranged father, Andrew Small, in the animated sitcom Home Movies. Additionally, Louis C.K. joined the writing team for the sketch comedy show Cedric the Entertainer Presents from 2002 to 2003. Then in August 2005, Louis would star in a half-hour HBO comedy special as a part of the stand-up series One Night Stand. This was an incredibly popular series amongst comedy fans and featured some of the best comedians in the world such as Bill Burr, Patrice O'Neill, Jerry Seinfeld, and many others. All in all, this was the early career of Louis C.K. and a lot of the work he was doing when he was a young man finding his way through the world as an artist. A lot of comedians take time to develop and start to get more personal on stage within their material. Louis C.K. was no different. In this case, because it took Louis a long time to find his voice on stage. Even in his early career, when he started to find some success, he talks about how he hated his old act and how it made him miserable to keep doing it over and over and over again throughout each different city. He said he did the same act for 15 years, but then something changed. I'll let Louis explain it for you.
I had been going in a circle that didn't take me anywhere. Nobody gave a shit who I was, and I didn't either. I honestly didn't. I used to hear my act and go, this is shit, and I hate it. But I've been doing this for 15 years, and stopping now is like getting out of prison. Like, what do you do after 15 years of stand-up comedy? How do you re-enter the workforce? So I was in a really bad place. I listened to a CD of George talking about comedy and the workshopping it and talking about it seriously. And the thing that blew me away about this fellow was that he just kept putting out specials. Every year there'd be a new George Carlin special, a new George Carlin album. They just kept coming. They asked him, how do you do all this material? And I'm like, and I hear him and he says, well, I just decided every year I'd be working on that year's special. And I'd do the special and then I'd just chuck out the material. And I'd start again with nothing. And I thought, that's crazy. How do you throw away? It took me 15 years to build this shitty hour. If I throw it away, I got nothing. But he gave me the courage to try, and also I was desperate. What the fuck else was I going to do? This idea that you throw everything away and you start over again. And
Louis did the same act for so long, and then when he saw George Carlin talking about building a new hour every single year, it really inspired Louis to just throw out his old act and start fresh. This pressure that Louis put on himself is what made him start to go deep and find out who he was on stage, and this spawns some of the most legendary bits we've ever seen and heard as a comedy audience.
I'm very happy. I'm married, and I love my wife. I love her very much. My wife hates me. She fucking hates me. She hates me so much. The thing that she's usually mad about is simple. She says that I don't listen to her when she's talking. And I don't. But I try every time I try because I love this retarded woman, so I try really hard.
Some of these bits are extremely famous just because Louis said them. They wouldn't be nearly as special if some Joe Schmo from Idaho said them. For a lot of people who go to see comedy shows, they're not just listening to your jokes, they're drawing conclusions about you based on these jokes. It is important for a lot of comedians to have a personality and character unique to themselves because that's what makes you stand out to an audience ultimately. There are a lot of comedians like Steve Martin and Anthony Jeselnik who just do setup punchline joke and there's really no takeaway from that, but based on the comedians who are becoming popular now, it's hard to believe that most people will be able to continue that sentiment of setup punchline joke with no real message behind it. This journey allowed Louis C.K. to go from a regular comedian to the comedic powerhouse and identity that he is widely known for today. And with that progress on stage being made, Louis went from being a big comedian to a much, much bigger comedian. Louis started getting some major traction around the late 2000s. In 2006, after starting to build a new act upon inspiration from George Carlin, Louis C.K. wrote and starred in the sitcom Lucky Louie. Lucky Louie was a series that premiered on HBO and was videotaped in front of a live studio audience. At the time, this was HBO's first time doing a live taping in front of a studio audience, so Louis was way ahead of the curve on that note. The show featured Pamela Adlon, Kelly Gould, Rick Shapiro, Jim Norton, and many more. Many people describe Lucky Louie as a bluntly realistic look at what family life is like from all angles. I would say that this description is accurate, but that absurdity demonstrated within the show is what made it special to me. My favorite part of Lucky Louie was when Louie's friend Rich, played by Jim Norton, talks about how he's getting married. Check this out.
I'm getting married.
What? When?
Made it today.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Hey. Wait a minute, who are you getting married to?
My mother's friend.
Why?
One of my teeth is rotted. If I marry her, I can use a Medicaid.
What an insanely hilarious moment on the show. It's crazy to think that somebody would pick a life partner or chain themselves down to another person based on the fact that they need benefits, not even because you love them. To some people that may seem like a cruel interpretation of what marriage is, but I think that cruelty and element of rawness really makes the show's comedy stand out, especially for someone like Louis, who in 2006 was on the tail end of his own marriage that would soon end in 2008 when he and his wife Alex decided to get a divorce. To be even more specific, the show is set to depict what the average working class family looks like, and it includes a bunch of topics from sex and racism to friendships and marriage. Things got extremely interesting when the show started to see big numbers though. In August 2006, Lucky Louie got some bad press from a guy named Bill Donahue, who at the time was the president of the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights. He had written a news release about the show where he had lampooned the offensive nature of the show and called it barbaric. Bill didn't stop there though. He made a bulleted list of content from Lucky Louie that the organization found morbid and obscene from the 10 episodes of the show that had been aired at the time. This was one of Louis C.K.'s first big controversies he would encounter in his career. Then in January 2007, Louis was a guest on the Opie and Anthony radio show, which was co-hosted by Jim Norton, who was also an actor on Lucky Louie, and Bill Donahue would become a guest on this particular episode after he called into the show live. Once he was on the phone, Louis immediately held his feet to the fire and challenged his positions that were in his press release. Louis accused him of misrepresenting the show by taking it out of context. I'll show you some of that here.
Because a married couple trying to make sure that their sex life is healthy before moving on to a second child, how can you have a problem with that?
Did I have a problem with that?
Wow. Apparently, according to your press release.
The Reagan defense, I love it.
That's offensive to Catholics.
Bill, is there anybody that ever does the press releases that you might just kind of glance over and go, all right, and then they kind of, do you word everything accurately? Because what Louis is telling you is the truth. I mean, that really did come out.
Yep.
Well, I mean, listen, I write all my own stuff, so I can't blame it on somebody else.
Have you watched Lucky Louie?
No, I haven't.
Well, that's odd because you wrote that thing.
So after Louis and Jim Norton confronted him live on the air, he would immediately bend the knee and admit that it actually had never seen an episode of the show, which is insane to me. It's a practice that's become way too common in journalism, where people will write articles on things they've never even seen with their own eyes or heard with their own ears. Yet they will proceed to write a disingenuous article anyway that seeks to defame or annihilate the credibility of some artist or creative that crossed some arbitrary line that the writer has in their head. It's a load of crap. Even though Bill Donahue admitted he had never seen the show, the press release would go on to do a lot of damage because the network airing it started to receive pressure from higher-ups about the show and its offensive nature. Even though the show had prepared 8 scripts for a second season, Lucky Louie would go on to be cancelled in September 2006. Early into Louis' career as a comedian and director, he was already embroiled in controversy. With his newfound controversy, though, Louis' audience would continue to multiply as more time went on. Then as Louis continued to make leaps and bounds with his stand-up comedy career, he was eventually a part of Opie and Anthony's traveling virus comedy tour that happened in 2007. This was a legendary comedy tour that featured some of the best comedians in the world. Some of them included Patrice O'Neill, Bill Burr, Greg Giraldo, Bobby Kelly, Ralphie May, Tracy Morgan, and so many more. Louis had become extremely cozy with Opie and Anthony from doing stand-up comedy for so many years in New York at all the different comedy clubs in town, and this led to Louis becoming a regular guest on the Opie and Anthony radio show. In 2007, Louis hosted a 3-hour phone-in show on the Opie and Anthony radio show at the request of Opie and Anthony. Within this 3-hour show, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld had called into the show and was interviewed. While on the air, Louis asked him some absurd questions that were incredibly appropriate for a politician to be asked, and by that I mean he asked him if he's a reptilian space alien that likes to eat Mexican babies. To which Donald Rumsfeld, instead of just saying no, like an adult, refused to comment on the question.
Let him answer, are you a lizard?
Here's the short answer. Yeah. I'm in New York City. I walk down the street, people walk up, shake hands, stop me, they want an autograph. He's a lizard. Want to get a photograph with me. Go to eat last night at dinner, and Joyce and I were sitting there in the little Italian restaurant, and a man came up and said he'd like to buy my dinner, and I refused. And it turns out I paid for my dinner. The next thing I know, the waiter comes back and said the man insisted to pay for your dinner, and here's your canceled receipt for paying.
Oh, wow, that's very nice.
There's plenty of people that...
But you didn't answer the question.
He's not going to dignify...
I think you're hanging around with the wrong people.
He's not going to dignify an answer to, are you a lizard, Louis?
Why not?
Because he's not a lizard.
What is the story about getting somebody paid for your dinner? I would pay for a lizard's dinner.
I think I understood the fact that there are people out there that appreciate what he's done as a leader. And
there's plenty of evidence that this guy is a well-decorated and appreciated American. And he has more credibility than almost anybody.
Exactly.
But I just want to know if he's a lizard.
This controversial video from the Opie and Anthony radio show went absolutely viral, and it led to Louis gaining a lot of attention on the internet. Despite some hate from the controversy, Louis was mainly gaining supporters who thought this was a ballsy question to ask a politician and who respected the wacky antics he displayed. After this newfound publicity Louis received for hilariously pressing Donald Rumsfeld, he ended 2007 on an incredibly high note when he recorded and released his first hour-long special titled Shameless. This special was recorded at the Henry Fonda Theater located in Los Angeles, California. This special aired on HBO, and then after that it was released on DVD. Most of the time, in pop culture, the critics are out-of-touch morons who wouldn't know good media if it smacked them in the face, but they actually gave Shameless an incredible review. The Guardian highlighted how Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 96% and described it as such. 15 years of hard work and evolution have created an apparently effortless honesty that is fluent and heartfelt. Louis C.K. is the voice of resignation. This is a very observant look at the style of comedy Louis has consistently delivered now for decades. Then, similar to his hero George Carlin, he started working on his next hour of comedy immediately after taping Shameless and releasing it to the public. Then in 2008, Louis C.K. gained even more publicity when he made appearances in 3 new movies which were titled Welcome Home, Roscoe Jenkins, Diminished Capacity, and Role Models. In addition to a few noteworthy movie appearances, come March 2008, Louis would go on to tape another hour-long comedy special that would be titled Chewed Up. This special premiered on the Showtime network on October 4th, 2008, and was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Writing for a Comedy or Variety Special. The special was absolutely hilarious, and once again, it was critically acclaimed by the media. Louis also dedicated the special in loving memory of George Carlin, who would go on to lose his life from heart failure on June 22nd, 2008, the same year that Louis had taped Chewed Up. All in all, the special was another huge breaking point for Louis, and then more good news for Louis, he got divorced the same year. I'm kidding, obviously, but according to Louis, divorce is always a good thing, so I thought I would, well, you understand. The divorce hit Louis really hard though. Lucky for him, though, he would share joint custody with his ex-wife and would still get to see his daughters quite frequently. In a time where Louis really started seeing the fruits of his success manifest themselves, this really worried him a lot. In a 2010 interview, Louis C.K. talks about how after the divorce, he was seriously concerned about where his act would go from there, considering the fact that a lot of stories from his marriage were seriously interesting and worth telling on stage. To Louis, all that had come to an end now, and all he could really do was advance and do the same thing with stories from his now divorce. One thing I learned was when Louis was beginning to break through and gain some serious fame and notoriety, he decided to start training at a boxing gym where fighter Mickey Ward trained at. His reason for this was he wanted to be able to endure the grueling and consistent grunt work one has to do when training boxing so that you're in good enough shape to fight and take a beating. He drew a direct parallel to what it's like when you're building a new hour of comedy as a stand-up comedian from the ground up and you've thrown away all of your best tools. As mentioned earlier, Louis C.K. takes writing comedy very seriously and undergoes a long and arduous process to build a tight hour of comedy. He actually shares this method for writing on an interview with Charlie Rose. Check it out.
Yeah, specials are something. It's to me. I used to describe it like the way they make samurai swords, or used to. Yeah. That they bang it and then fold it and then bang it again, and then they fold it and keep banging it. So they pound on it. Right. And they fold it so that they're squeezing out all the oxygen that's in the. You know what I mean? Yeah, just keep making it perfect. So every time you think I've got an hour. No, you don't. Write another hour and then fold it into that one and then get rid of all the impurities and all the bad stuff and then keep doing that.
This is a lot harder than just drinking a lot and then screaming into the mic like an idiot until 60 minutes has gone by. Louis treats building an hour of comedy like the art form that it is. The folding of a katana blade to get rid of all the impurities is an incredible visualization for understanding how a comedy album should be. When you write an hour, You're not done, and the real work has actually just begun, finding spots for punchlines, tags, callbacks, anything that will allow you to be killing for the entire hour you're performing as a comedian. When I first learned how Louis C.K. would do this method over and over again, it made me really respect him more as a comedian because of how seriously he takes the craft and how he doesn't want to just coast on his fame and actually produce formidable comedy for his audience. More on his stand-up specials later, but in those moments when Louis was really breaking and building a seriously large fan base, he would start to appear on late night TV much more often. In October 2008, Louis would appear on Late Night with Conan O'Brien and would have an absolutely outstanding performance. One of the clips recorded from his appearance was an iconic Louis C.K. bit titled "Everything is Amazing and Nobody's Happy." And this bit is basically exactly what it sounds like. Louis talks about how the technological advancements that have been made since he was a kid to now, when he's an adult, have been absolutely fantastic. Then he goes on to juxtapose this happiness and thankfulness with how Americans have become incredibly snotty and take the entire world around them for granted, and how absolutely sickening that is to him. I'll show a snippet of him explaining this concept.
Do you feel that we now, in the 21st century, we take technology for granted?
Well, yeah, because now we live in an amazing, amazing world, and it's wasted on the crappiest generation of just spoiled idiots that don't care, because this is what people are like now. They got their phone, and they're like, it won't. Give it a second. It's going to space. Can you give it a second to get back from space? Is the speed of light too slow for you? Yeah.
Not only is what he's saying incredibly funny here, but it rings very true because when you look around nowadays, you're surrounded by people who could give two craps about the fact that you can literally book a flight across the world in the next 24 hours and you can go. No one cares and everyone takes it for granted. This clip would go viral on YouTube and gain Louis even more publicity and notoriety, which helped to propel his stand-up career forward even more so than it already was headed. Then on April 18th, 2009, Louis would record a concert film titled Hilarious. This was big for Louis because not only was he recording another big comedy special, but all the previous specials had been directed and produced by television networks, but this one was different because it was produced independently by Louis himself. This was obviously a lot more pressure added to him, and then after the fact, Louis sold it to Epix and Comedy Central when it was completed. Given the fact that the special was given to Comedy Central, it would be given a little more time for edits and revision and not be fully released until late 2010. And then after that it was released on DVD and CD in 2011. This special set a record, being the first comedy film that was ever accepted into the Sundance Film Festival. Then over the next few years, Louis saw even more success in TV and stand-up comedy. He even saw himself acting in the popular show Parks and Recreation. In this show, Louis C.K. would play Dave Sanderson, who was a police officer and ex-boyfriend of Leslie Knope, who was played by Amy Poehler. Then he would co-star in the romantic comedy fantasy film that was titled The Invention of Lying, which was directed by Ricky Gervais. All in all, after years and years of struggling while doing the same hour of comedy for 10 to 15 years, Louis took a big risk and started a new act, which yielded him so much success in the late 2000s. Louis would take this hardship and discomfort and transcend from a regular comedian into one of the most unique and influential comedians we have ever seen pick up a microphone. This unique style of comedic voice that Louis had caused him to break through hard and really start building a fan base that adored his every move. And thus, Louis' golden years began. If you thought Louis was successful in the late 2000s, then I'd suggest you find a chair to sit down in, because this man, over the next 7 to 8 years, would change the definition of the word success to mean something that's so much more than what you or I could possibly imagine. In August 2009, FX picked up Louis C.K.'s TV show, Louis, which was an American comedy drama TV series that premiered on June 29, 2010. The show was written, directed, created, produced, and edited by Louis himself. In the show, Louis plays a fictional version of himself, a comedian and newly divorced dad raising his 2 daughters in New York City. I could probably do an entire video talking about the brilliance of this TV show. The plot of this show is fictional, but loosely based on Louis' real life. Some of the specific plot lines aren't entirely accurate to his life, obviously, but there are real events that led Louis to writing virtually every single angle of comedy you see in the TV show. The show is absolutely atypical when compared to many other comedy shows on TV, because it consisted of largely unconnected segments and storylines adjacent to Louis' life. And to top it all off, there are stand-up segments filmed at New York City comedy clubs, most often the Comedy Cellar and Caroline's Comedy Club, and sometimes these stand-up segments would be linked to the story being told, but sometimes they would just be completely random.
I heard that ducks have one hole, and they pee out of it, and they shit out of it,
they get in it. That has got to be one smelly, dirty hole.
The show is very funny, and often the styles of comedy present could be described as surrealism, absurdity, satirical, even nihilistic at times. Gallows humor is another type of humor you could use to describe the show at times. One thing Louis did in the show that was also exceptionally different was the practice of shooting the stand-up segments from the perspective of the stage with the comedian rather than from the audience's perspective, which is more traditional. Most of the time when you see stand-up material online, it's from an audience perspective, but for Louis, the camera is right next to him while he's on stage performing the material the whole time. More often than not, Louis would write original stand-up material that would only be used in the show and not recorded in a comedy special outside of the TV show. Louis would do this to ensure that the people who watch his show were not coming to see him live on tour and just seeing the same jokes they've already heard him tell on TV. Another thing that was unique about Louis was the careful carelessness that Louis had when writing the show. Most of the episodes in the series have standalone plots, even though there are a few recurring themes, such as Louis spending time with a woman named Pamela, who was played by Pamela Adlon, which would provide story arc continuity in a few different episodes. However, the continuity in Louis is not strictly enforced like other TV shows. A noteworthy example of this is how Louis's mom is portrayed differently in two ways with different actresses. Louis explains it this way: every episode has its own goal, and if it messes up the goal of another episode, I just don't care. This aspect of the show is very untraditional, but obviously this did not stop the show from being critically acclaimed anyway. Another thing about the show is that there are some plot lines that will take place outside of the show's ordinary time frame. For example, in the episode God, which was episode 11 in season 1 of Louis, we get to see Louis as a kid to highlight a specific part of his childhood. Another example was the episode Oh Louis / Tickets, which was episode 7 of season 2, where we get to see Louis doing stand-up comedy 9 years earlier in his career. The continuity is barely present, if at all, in the first 2 seasons. Then, during the 3rd season of the show, Louis put a bigger emphasis and importance on story continuity because he started including more multi-episode story arcs. Another abnormality with the show was the fact that besides Louis and his daughters, there really is no fixed cast that we habitually see. In fact, there are more guest appearances from other comedians and actors than there are fixed cast members. Given that in real life in the TV show Louis is a stand-up comedian in New York City, his social circle consists of many comedians and actors from this area who make recurring guest appearances such as Nick DiPaolo, Todd Barry, Dave Attell, Chris Rock, and Jerry Seinfeld playing a fictionalized version of themselves. One of my favorite moments on the show is the part where Louis is being followed around by Todd Barry, and all Todd's character says is how much Louis sucks at comedy, and he just craps on him the entire episode.
You suck, man. You suck at comedy.
It's pretty funny to watch, and it's even funnier when you realize Todd is meant to be a manifestation of his insecurities telling him how he's worthless and is terrible at comedy all the time. Pretty hilarious to me. Another aspect of the show that was different from traditional sitcoms was how the pacing of the show was much slower and laid back, and how jokes were often slow builds and slow cooks to the punchlines later in the show. Most sitcoms you watch, every line of dialogue is filled with rapid-fire, cancerous punchlines, but Louis is much more avant-garde in the sense that the story is just as important as the jokes themselves. To put it mildly, the show was freaking huge. Louis was met with critical acclaim on multiple occasions, and during its run was included in numerous critics' TV shows' top 10 lists. Compared to Lucky Louie, which was often met with an equal amount of hate and love from fans, Louis was almost entirely met with love from fans everywhere when it aired. Louis has received several Primetime Emmy Award nominations for his acting, writing, and directing, and has won for Outstanding Writing for a Comedy Series at the 64th and 66th Primetime Emmy Awards. The show was also included in the 101 Best Written TV Series list created by the Writers Guild of America. Here's some more critical acclaims I read online. Of the top TV lists tracked by Metacritic, Louis appeared on 9 of 28 in 2010 and 22 of 39 in 2011, the latter of which includes 3 lists where the show was ranked first on Metacritic. The first season scored 69 out of 100, based on 20 reviews. The second season scored 90 out of 100 on Metacritic, indicating universal acclaim, based on 7 reviews. The third season received critical acclaim, scoring 94 out of 100 on Metacritic, based on 16 reviews. The fourth season also received critical acclaim, scoring 93 out of 100 on Metacritic, based on 30 reviews. And the fifth season received critical acclaim as well, scoring 91 out of 100 on Metacritic, based on 20 reviews. The show lasted 5 seasons and 61 episodes, and by every metric, the show was a massive success. I could talk about Louis' show all day, but I'm going to spare you and move on. The point is, this show was a massive point for Louis and his brain as a comedian and actor, and it really just snowballed into all of his other projects as well. Between season 3 and 4 of the show, Louis took a 19-month sabbatical away to act in several different big movies. One of the movies was American Hustle, which was directed by David O. Russell in 2013. This movie was absolutely huge, and Louis played the character Stoddard Thorson. Some of the actors Louis shared the screen with are Christian Bale, Bradley Cooper, and Amy Adams, to name a few. Not a lot of comedians received the opportunity to act in a movie with so many top-tier, incredible actors, so this was an amazing experience for Louis to participate in an awesome movie, and also network with some actors who may someday work with Louis in one of his very own movies. The other movie Louis would appear in was Blue Jasmine, directed by one of Louis' heroes, Woody Allen. In this movie, Louis would play Al Munsinger, and he would act among another very talented cast consisting of Kate Blanchett, Sally Hawkins, Alec Baldwin, and also fellow comedian Andrew Dice Clay. This was another amazing opportunity for Louis because Woody Allen is one of his favorite directors, so getting to act on a movie of his had to have made him very happy inside. After these 2 movies, Louis would proceed to filming for his show Louis, but this season would be shortened because Louis had expressed interest in other projects, and at the time he wasn't sure if the show would even continue. The CEO of FX, John Landgraf, was an avid supporter of Louis and his work with the show. Then in 2011, Louis would join comedians Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, and Ricky Gervais in a roundtable discussion about stand-up comedy that would later be titled Talking Funny, which was a 1-hour special that initially aired on HBO. The special is now available to view for free on YouTube, so if you're a fan of anything comedy related, I would highly encourage you to check it out when you have an hour to spare. It's a great listen if you haven't heard it already. Then on December 10th, 2011, Louis would release his 4th full-length special titled Live at the Beacon Theater in New York City. Similar to the special Hilarious, Louis would produce and direct his special independently. However, unlike his earlier work, Louis would make the special available to purchase on his own website. He made the special only $5 to buy online without digital rights management, and he was hoping that avoiding DRM would establish a direct relationship between him and the consumer and deter most, if not all, illegal downloading. For the most part, this plan worked. The special was one of Louis' biggest specials ever, and I know I've said it about every special release so far, but the point is that every time Louis set the bar a little higher, it would just go up a notch each year he put out something new. This guy really was on top of the world with his art. It was almost like he couldn't miss. Within a few days of releasing this special, Louis netted well over $1 million, and he couldn't believe it. He decided to give half of this money to staff and charities. Some of the charity recipients were the Fistula Foundation, Green Chimneys, the Pavlov Foundation, Charity, Water, and Kiva. What Louis did here was something that would inspire many other comedians, not donating to charity, but instead recording their own specials independently and then releasing it on their own website for an affordable price. Once again, Louis was just ahead of the curve and started something that would pave the path for many younger comedians. After another incredible special, Louis just kept getting bigger and bigger. He was then invited to host Saturday Night Live on November 3rd, 2012, and brought the heat. He did so well on SNL with the monologue and sketches that he was subsequently Primetime Emmy Award nominated for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Comedy Series. It seemed like anything comedy related that Louis did led to him being nominated for an Emmy repeatedly. In 2013, Louis' production company, Pig Newton, where he works with producer Blair Breard, signed a contract to develop and executive produce pilots for FX networks. Then in 2014, FX announced that Louis C.K. and Zach Galifianakis would begin working together to produce and write a comedy pilot that Zach had pitched to FX. The 10-episode single-camera comedy titled Baskets premiered on January 21st, 2016. The show featured Zach as a struggling clown named Chip Baskets, and this would prove to be a successful show on FX. Going back a little bit, while Louis was working on this project with Zach Galifianakis, he would record and then later release his 6-hour-long comedy special titled Live at the Comedy Store in January 2015. Like Live at the Beacon Theater, Louis would proceed to emulate the model of selling the special for a fixed price on his very own website. One of the big differences with this special compared to the previous ones is that it was recorded at a comedy club and not a theater. As stated by the title, this special was recorded at the world-famous Comedy Store located in West Hollywood, California. After being available on Louis' website for 4 months, the special would premiere exclusively on FX on May 28, 2015. Louis was then invited back to host Saturday Night Live twice, first on March 29, 2014, and then after that it was May 16, 2015. Louis once once again received Emmy Award nominations for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Comedy Series for both episodes of Saturday Night Live. At this point in time, everything that Louis touched turned to gold. Louis would also attend the Saturday Night Live 40th anniversary special, where he was chosen to introduce a montage of the pre-recorded sketches. In May 2015, it was announced that CK would write, direct, and star in the film I'm a Cop, to be produced by Scott Rudin, Dave Becky, and Blair Beard, with a budget of $8 million. Unfortunately for the world, Louis would cancel this project for personal reasons. Then in 2015, Louis C.K. set another amazing record as a stand-up comedian. He became the first comedian to sell out Madison Square Garden 3 consecutive times in a single tour. To put things into perspective, Madison Square Garden is an arena that seats 19,500 people. 19,500 people 3 nights in a row is absolutely unreal. I'm not lying to you when I say that Louis is absolutely huge. He then recorded the audio and sold it on his website as a special titled Louis C.K. Live at Madison Square Garden. Then in November 2015, Louis would co-star in the biographical drama film titled Trumbo as a composite character that was based on real events, where 5 different screenwriters were blacklisted from Hollywood based on their alleged ties to the Communist Party in the 1940s. He was also the executive producer of the pilot for the Amazon Video black comedy series One Mississippi, starring Tig Notaro, in November 2015. It was ordered for a full season by Amazon. Then on January 30th, 2016, Louis released Horace and Pete, which was a tragicomic drama series featuring actors such as Steve Buscemi, Alan Alda, Eddie Falco, and Jessica Lange. This was a self-funded project by Louis, where he directed, wrote, and starred in the series himself. The themes covered were mental illness, abuse, politics, and family dynamics. The series was met with a lot of positivity from critics and focused mainly on the masterful acting performances demonstrated by the cast. Louis had expressed interest in a second season, but as of right now, nothing has been announced. Louis has also done some other notable work from late 2015 to early 2017, such as voice acting in The Secret Life of Pets, developing the series Better Things with Pamela Adlon, and he also directed a movie called I Love You, Daddy. This was a movie that Louis directed where he played a father named Glenn Topher, and the main focus was the dynamic he had between his daughter, played by Chloe Grace Moretz. He actually shot this movie in secret and filmed it in black and white just because he felt like it. Then Louis would tape and release another stand-up special titled 2017 that would be aired on Netflix. The same year, on April 8th, 2017, Louis would host SNL for the 4th time and make jokes about a racist chicken, white privilege, and he was praised for his ability to walk the line when joking about sensitive topics. He also dedicated his performance to the late Don Rickles, who died the same week he appeared on Saturday Night Live and released his special. At this point, it seemed like Louis was quite literally the industry darling, and that in the public's eyes he could do no wrong. These were the golden years for Louis C.K., and nobody had any idea what was around the corner for Louis and just how grim it would get for him. This entire video so far has been me borderline glazing Louis C.K., because that's what it sounds like when you mention all of his achievements in rapid succession. However, this is where things got interesting and the real controversy begins. In 2015, rumors started spreading about Louis and his questionable behavior towards women on various different websites. Some of these rumors started receiving more credibility when high-profile figures started to speak out, such as Roseanne Barr, Jen Kirkman, and Tig Notaro. At this time, though, they were simply rumors, and it didn't really affect Louis that much, besides people just calling him weird, which was already confirmed by the subject matter of his material. Then 2 years later, Tig Notaro was doing an interview with Vanity Fair in September 2017, where she went on to say that she had cut ties with Louis C.K. altogether. Louis was a one-time collaborator and producer on her show One Mississippi, but this was cut off very abruptly after an unspecified incident took place between her and Louis. She concluded her statement by saying that Louis should address the rumors of sexual impropriety given what she encountered while working with him. Louis had denied all these allegations in the past, and he defended himself once more in a September 2017 New York Times interview by saying, "They're rumors. That's all that is. I don't think talking about this stuff in the press is a good idea." Then on November 9th, 2017, The Orchard, which was the distributor of Louis' upcoming film, I Love You, Daddy, canceled the New York premiere of the film due to unexpected circumstances. Later that day, the New York Times would publish an article detailing allegations of sexual misconduct that were levied against Louis from 5 different women. The women who spoke out in the article included comedy duo Dana Min Goodman and Julia Wolov, who claimed that Louis C.K. had invited them to his hotel room in 2002 during the U.S. Comedy Arts Festival, where he masturbated in front of them. They relayed the incident to Improv Olympics founder Charna Halpern. The comedian Rebecca Corey stated on the set of a television pilot in 2005, Louis offered to masturbate in front of her and she declined. Corey reported the incident and no action was taken. Then comedian Abby Schachner alleged that Louis masturbated while they were on the phone, describing the conduct as both unprofessional and inappropriate. Both Corey and Schachner stated that Louis privately apologized for his past behavior several years later. With the overwhelming pressure from the New York Times article, Louis had to respond, and he did so publicly stating, "These stories are true," and saying that while he initially thought it was okay because I never showed a woman my without asking first, he went on to express remorse, stating, "The power I had over these women is that they admired me, and I wielded that power irresponsibly." He then concluded his apology by saying, "I have spent my long and lucky career talking and saying anything I want. I will now step back and take a long time to listen." This was when things started going extremely downhill for Louis. After admitting guilt in his statement to the New York Times, Louis started to suffer very harsh repercussions. In 2018, Louis stated that the fallout for the scandal had taken him through hell and back, and that he had lost approximately $35 million. The release and distribution of his film I Love You Daddy had been canceled a week before its debut date. In order to release this movie eventually, Louis had to purchase the distribution rights back from the Orchard in December 2017. Then FX and Netflix both cut ties with Louis, and HBO had cut Louis' appearances from one of their upcoming TV specials titled Night of Too Many Stars. And on top of that, they removed all his content from their on-demand services. Then Louis' manager, Dave Becky, dropped Louis as a client and immediately distanced himself from the situation. Then TBS scrapped its animated series The Cops, which was co-created by Albert Brooks and set to be replaced. Finally, to make matters worse, all the voice acting he had done in projects like The Secret Life of Pets 2 and Disney Channel's Gravity Falls had been replaced. This was the point in time where Louis C.K. had gone from being one of the most beloved figures in comedy and TV to one of the most hated within a couple weeks. This bad press had completely derailed his career trajectory, and he was forced to face severe repercussions for his actions. This was Louis' fall from grace. Now, unlike Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, or R. Kelly, Louis C.K. didn't technically break the law because even though it is an incredibly strange request, Louis did ask for permission before he proceeded with his actions and never forced anyone to do anything. However, I understand that at the time, Louis had a coveted position in show business when he did ask for consent, so there is an abuse of power present there. However, he was not incarcerated and he was simply exiled by society for a set period of time. I say this because eventually Louis returned on stage at the Comedy Cellar on August 26, 2018, approximately 1 year after he confirmed the allegations levied against him by the New York Times were true. It was reported that when Louis took the stage, he was immediately greeted by a standing ovation from the audience and that he made no reference to the sexual controversy. This report is quite biased because I've listened to the leak set and it is quite literally the first thing that comes out of his mouth when the performance starts.
So, what kind of a year did you guys have? I bet none of you had the same year that I had. I bet not a single one of you.
I know he doesn't mention it specifically, but it's tongue-in-cheek clearly. There were several comedians who were adamantly opposed to Louis C.K. returning so soon after his exile from society. Most notably, Judd Apatow said this about Louis.
So when they return and they don't say a word about it, that's kind of weird because that's what we were hoping that you would do, is say, hey, I kind of get it now. I'm trying to do right by these people. I'm trying to evolve as a person. So he's not saying that at all. Mm-hmm. He's just punching down.
But then there were about 10 times more comedians who were in support of Louis C.K. returning to the stage to perform stand-up comedy, such as Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, Bill Burr, and Norm Macdonald. I'm a little biased, but I felt like Norm Macdonald had the most nuanced and measured take on the situation, saying that the matter of whether or not it was time for Louis C.K. to return to performing should have been entirely dependent on what the audience thought.
Comedians have said this guy should not be able to ever perform again. You know, I always thought the audience would decide whether you're an objectionable comic or even a good comic, you know? And so Louis went up here at the Comedy Cellar, and the audience let him know. I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. But if the audience don't like him, then the club won't book him. I mean, that's how things work.
After he returned to comedy, obviously he was drenched in controversy and bad press, but continued to do work on building a new comedy act anyway. Eventually, in December 2018, an audience member had secretly recorded Louis C.K. while he was working on new material and leaked it online for everybody to hear. In this leaked recording, there were jokes about the Parkland tragedy that took place in Florida, and this really took the controversy to the next level. One of the survivors went on the record saying how Louis' jokes were in bad taste and highly inappropriate, which makes me think these people have never even watched Louis C.K. before. That's kind of what he does, whether you like it or not, but the media had an absolute field day nonetheless, and painted Louis out to be attacking these families and survivors after his own controversy. However, Louis just ignored the press and continued to do his thing, and toured across the country selling out every single show and building a new hour of comedy that he would later tape as a new special. To combat the leaking of any new material, Louis would enforce locking up audience members' phones before entering the room. A lot of other comedians started enforcing this too, such as Dave Chappelle, Bill Burr, Joe Rogan, and many others. A lot of comedy clubs were criticized for their decisions to book Louis C.K., but it's quite obvious why they would take a risk on Louis when you consider that comedy clubs are businesses that need to keep the lights on, and that Louis would sell out any show dates that he would post online. Then in January 2020, Louis performed an unannounced set, receiving a standing ovation for the 8th annual benefit show for the late Patrice O'Neill, organized by fellow comedian Bill Burr. Then when the pandemic started, Louis was unable to tour with the country being shut down, so he would go on to release Sincerely without advance notice on April 4th, 2020. At the end of the special, Louis gave thanks to Bill Burr, Norm Macdonald, Dave Chappelle, and Chris Rock, but most of the reviews from comedy fans were incredibly positive, and a lot of people noted that despite his actions, Louis C.K. was still undoubtedly one of the greatest comedians to ever live. With this special being released selling over 200,000 times with a price of $8, it was clear that Louis' ability to sell a great product to his audience had not been compromised at all, and that he had certainly been given the okay by his audience to continue performing stand-up comedy and making movies. Now, we've already discussed ad nauseum how Louis C.K. is a big believer in working on a new hour of comedy every single year, similar to George Carlin. I'll be taking a brief moment, as all moments are I suppose, to tell you about all the specials Louis currently has available and which ones are my absolute favorite. Out of fear of being copyright claimed and potentially sued, I'll be paraphrasing the bits that make the specials my favorite, and you will have to take my word for it. Louis currently has 13 stand-up comedy specials available to view or listen to, and 12 of them are available on his website, while the only outlier is Louis C.K. 2017, which is available on Netflix only. His specials include Live in Houston, Shameless, Chewed Up, Hilarious, Live at the Beacon Theater, Word, Live at Carnegie Hall, Oh My God, Live at the Comedy Store, Live at Madison Square Garden, 2017, Sincerely Louis C.K., Sorry, Back to the Garden, and Louis C.K. at the Dolby. Most of these specials are available to watch with the video and audio, but 3 of the specials are audio only. The 3 that are audio only are Live in Houston, Word, Live at Carnegie Hall, and Live at Madison Square Garden. Out of all these comedy specials, each of them are hilarious and brilliant in their own way, but the 2 that stand out to me the most are Chewed Up and Live at the Beacon Theater. Chewed Up has an opening bit about offensive words that I think is 8 of the best minutes of comedy ever recorded. I think you would love it, and this special is available to listen to on Spotify and to watch on Louis C.K.'s website. After the offensive words bit, he talks about his daughters a lot, and he also has an incredibly funny bit about your morality being linked to how long you waited after September 11th to masturbate. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Next, Live at the Beacon Theater has some amazing bits about selfishness that are just so unbelievably funny, because Louis will talk about terrible things he does and why he does them, but he does it in a way that is just uncanny, and it leaves you laughing the entire time you're watching while also thinking to yourself, man, this guy's a jerk. Also, I will give a bonus recommendation. If you're a person who wants to hear more about Louis' scandal from his own perspective, then you should watch Sincerely Louis C.K. At the end, he talks briefly about how much trouble he got into, and he reflects on how bad he felt and how he feels remorse for the victims. I'd say it's a pretty genuine commentary he provides for the fans, and if you're looking for something like that, this special is absolutely your cup of tea. All in all, Louis C.K. has an incredible work ethic, and his ability to produce quality special after quality special year after year is truly outstanding and uncanny. Whether you like him or not, it is undeniable that Louis C.K. has had a tremendous influence on the art of stand-up comedy. So many comedians have deemed him as a contemporary, it's unbelievable. Some of the best comedians working today, such as Shane Gillis, Mark Normand, Sam Morril, and many more. When the scandal went down, Louis was justifiably attacked and criticized from many different angles. However, where people went wrong is when they tried to use the situation as a way to criticize Louis' comedy and say how he was never funny in the first place. You are absolutely within your right to question Louis' conduct, especially with his level of influence, but the second you take that and try to use it to spearhead the idea that Louis is a bad comedian and was never funny, that's when you lose me. I'm going to say something that most rational people can get behind. An artist can be a good person or a bad person, but whether their art is good or not is ultimately indicative of whether they will sell or not. If you have a problem with Louis C.K.'s conduct off stage, but you think he's still one of the funniest comedians on the planet, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and do not let people tell you otherwise. If you happen to have a room temperature IQ, and you can't separate the art from the artist, then that's fine. But when you try to police people into not listening because you personally have a problem with that artist, then you should just shut the hell up and be an adult. Another thing, trying to paint Louis C.K. or Aziz Ansari with the same brush used to paint someone like Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein is incredibly disingenuous, and this only muddies the water further between literal atrocities against humanity versus mistakes that really didn't cause irreparable harm to someone. Don't get it twisted, I don't like what Louis did to those women, but what he did is not deplorable to the level of Bill Cosby. It just isn't. And I'm sick of people pretending it is. People are sick of being told who they should and shouldn't listen to. With that being said, I stand by everything I've said regarding Louis being one of the funniest comedians on the planet, and many people would agree with that sentiment. However, he is by far the most controversial comedian on the planet with everything he's been through. Having the level of fame he had and then losing it all so quickly just to come back just makes the guy truly an enigma. Nowadays you can see him appearing on podcasts and regularly touring across different continents. Louis C.K. has made his comeback. In conclusion, Louis C.K. has been through just about all of it. To go from a young man being traumatized at open mics, to opening for Jerry Seinfeld in his early 20s, to throwing out his entire act and starting from scratch, just to become one of the biggest comedians in the world and a household name, is truly amazing. Then to commit sin, lose so much, take a hiatus, and then return and show the world that you're meant to be on stage, whether the people were ready for it or not, takes a tremendous amount of fortitude and courage. It is for these reasons why Louis C.K. is one of my favorite comedians, and why I will still support him as an artist even after he's done wrong, because his art and product is so good that his legacy will continue to grow no matter what he does next. This has been Louis C.K., the most controversial comedian ever.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for making it to the end of the Louis C.K. documentary. Just a quick apology, I was a little sick this week, so that's why my throat might sound a little bit off to you guys. Hopefully it wasn't too much of a distraction. Louis C.K. is one of the greatest comedians to ever live, and he has a very interesting story with everything that happened to him, so I wanted to cover that in this documentary, and I think I did it very well. If you guys want to support me in making these videos, the easiest way to do that is to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because that's a free way to support me, to let me know I'm doing a good job with these documentaries. And if you want to take your support to the next level, I recently started a Patreon page. So if you want to directly support me financially every month, you can subscribe to the Patreon and receive some benefits, like they got to see this video early, they got to see the intro of this video when I was working on it, they also get to see some of the updates in the future upcoming videos, they also get to decide what videos I make in the future. So if you want to join the Patreon and help me in making quality content and help prevent me from working a desk job so I can put more time into making better videos for you guys, please check out the Patreon and please consider supporting me there. Shout out to my supporters on Patreon at Jason Murray and Crossblocker for helping me get one step closer to my dream of making content full time and being financially independent and helping me make these videos better. All in all, I hope you guys really love the documentary and I hope you subscribe to see more in the future. Take care of yourselves, your families, your loved ones. I love you, and I'll see you in the next one.